I'm Samantha Blake, 28, and I buried my husband at 6 months pregnant, while his family whispered gold digger behind my back. They questioned my grief, my love, even my right to be there. For 2 years I endured their accusations and legal challenges, protecting my daughter from their venom, while struggling to rebuild our lives. But when they finally pushed too far, demanding I prove my worth to claim what was rightfully ours, they had no idea what they'd awakened. The quiet widow they'd dismissed had been documenting everything, and what I'd discovered about their beloved. Some would silence them forever. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you've ever felt judged or underestimated in your darkest moments, you'll want to hear how this story ends. Like this video for more stories of truth, justice, and unexpected strength. The love letters are still in my jewelry box, yellowed at the edges but precious beyond measure. David's handwriting, slightly messy but endearing, filled pages with promises I believed would last forever. My dearest Sam, he'd written during our senior year at Northwestern, you make even the library feel like paradise. We met in constitutional law class, where his quick wit and genuine laugh caught my attention, before his striking green eyes did. I was focused on my pre-law track, determined to prove myself in a field dominated by men. David was studying business, already talking about expanding his family's modest consulting firm into something meaningful. Our first date was coffee that turned into dinner, then a walk along Lake Michigan that lasted until sunrise. He talked about his dreams with such passion, how he wanted to build something lasting, something that would make his father proud. His dad had died when David was 16, leaving behind a small business and a family struggling to keep it afloat. Eleanor Blake had been skeptical of me from the beginning, though she hid it well behind polite smiles and careful questions. "She's lovely, David," she'd said after our first family dinner, "but are you sure she understands our world?" Even then, I'd felt the subtle dismissal, the way she'd emphasize our world, as if I were an outsider looking in. David's brother Marcus was different, charming, easygoing, quick with jokes that sometimes had an edge I couldn't quite place. He'd welcomed me warmly, perhaps too warmly, always finding reasons to touch my arm or stand closer than necessary. David never seemed to notice, or if he did, he brushed it off as Marcus being Marcus. The engagement ring was his grandmother's, a simple solitaire that Eleanor had reluctantly handed over after David insisted. "She would have wanted you to have it," David had said, but I'd seen the flash of pain in Eleanor's eyes as she'd placed it in my palm. That ring represented acceptance I'd never truly earned. Our wedding was small but perfect, held in the garden, behind the Blake family home. Eleanor had wanted something grander, more befitting the family name, but David had stood firm. "This is about Sam and me, Mom, not about impressing anyone." The photos from that day showed genuine joy, David's hand protectively over mine, both of us glowing with happiness and hope. The pregnancy announcement came 2 years later, carefully planned and eagerly anticipated. David had been beside himself with excitement, immediately calling his mother to share the news. "She's going to be such a wonderful mother," he'd told Eleanor, his voice brimming with pride. But I'd caught Eleanor's expression in the mirror. Behind him a flash of something I couldn't quite identify. Fear? Resentment? Or simply the realization that another woman would now share David's heart? Those early months of pregnancy were magical. David would talk to my growing belly every night, making plans for our daughter's future. "She'd be brilliant like her mother," he'd whisper, his hands gentle on my stomach. Strong and determined and capable of anything. Looking back now, I realize how carefully David had shielded me from his family's true feelings. He'd handled their subtle criticisms, their pointed questions about my background, their concerns about how quickly things were moving. He'd wanted to protect me, to preserve the bubble of happiness we'd created together. But protection built on silence has its own dangers. The love letters proved our relationship was real, but they couldn't shield me from the storm that was coming. They couldn't prepare me for the moment when David's protective presence would be gone, leaving me to face his family's judgment alone. The police report sits in my filing cabinet, official and cold, reducing the worst night of my life to clinical language and checkbox categories. Fatal motor vehicle accident. Driver failed to negotiate curve. No evidence of mechanical failure. Weather conditions clear. It was a Tuesday in October, the kind of crisp evening that made Chicago feel alive. With possibility. David had been working late again, trying to close a deal that would secure our financial future before the baby arrived. I'd made his favorite dinner shepherd's pie with extra cheese, and kept it warm in the oven while I folded tiny onesies and arranged them in the nursery dock. The call came at 11:47 p.m. I know because I've been watching the clock, wondering if I should text him or just go to bed. The officer's voice was gentle but professional. "Mrs. Blake? This is Officer Martinez with the Chicago Police Department. I'm afraid I have some difficult news about your husband." The words after that became a blur. Accident. Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Come immediately. I remember dropping the phone, my hands shaking so violently I couldn't pick it up. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing my distress, and I pressed both hands to my belly, trying to hold myself together. The hospital was a maze of sterile corridors and harsh fluorescent lights. David was already gone by the time I arrived, but they let me see him anyway. He looked peaceful, unmarked except for a small cut on his forehead. I touched his hand, still warm but lifeless, and whispered all the things I'd never said enough: how much I loved him, how proud I was of the man he'd become, how our daughter would know what a good father she almost had. Eleanor arrived an hour later, her face a mask of controlled grief. She took one look at me 6 months pregnant. Mascara streaked down my cheeks, David's blood on my shirt from where I'd held him, and her expression hardened. "This is your fault," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper but sharp as a blade. "He was working himself to death trying to provide for you and that baby." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Eleanor, please, don't." She held up a hand, her wedding ring catching the harsh hospital light. "Don't try to justify this. My son is dead because he felt pressured to be something he wasn't. Because you made him feel like he wasn't enough." Marcus arrived shortly after, his usual charm replaced by raw grief. He gathered his mother in his arms, shooting me a look that was equal parts accusation and pity. "Maybe you should go home, Samantha. This is family business now." Family business, as if I weren't carrying David's child. As if I hadn't been his wife, his partner, his chosen family for 3 years. I wanted to fight back, to claim my place in their grief, but the shock was too overwhelming. Instead, I drove home alone, too, our empty house with its warm dinner and baby clothes, and cried until I had nothing left. The next morning brought a parade of visitors, David's colleagues, our friends, neighbors who'd watched us paint the nursery with such hope. But Eleanor had already begun her campaign of whispered doubts. "She's so young," I heard her tell Mrs. Patterson from next door. "I'm not sure she really understood what marriage meant to someone like David." The funeral home meetings were torture. Every decision flowers, music. The guest list became a battle of wills. Eleanor wanted to minimize my role, to present David as a successful businessman tragically cut down in his prime, with barely a mention of his pregnant wife. When I insisted on including our wedding photo in the memorial display, she'd stared at it for a long moment before nodding curtly. "I suppose it shows he was happy," she'd said, as if happiness was somehow suspect. The stress was taking its toll on my body. My doctor warned me about elevated blood pressure, about the risks to both me and the baby. "You need to find ways to manage this grief," Dr. Patterson had said gently. "Your daughter needs you healthy." But health felt impossible when every breath was a struggle, when every mention of David's name brought fresh waves of pain. The accident had stolen more than my husband. It had stolen my future, my security, my sense of belonging in the world. And Eleanor's accusations echoed in my mind. Like a curse. This is your fault. He's dead because of you. The police report concluded that David had simply lost control on a curve he'd driven 1,000 times before. But Eleanor needed someone to blame, and I was the most convenient target. In her mind, I'd trapped her son with pregnancy and expectation, driven him to work himself into exhaustion, caused the accident through some cosmic form of guilt. The truth was simpler and more heartbreaking. Sometimes terrible things happen to good people, but Eleanor couldn't accept that randomness, that senseless loss. She needed a villain in her story of grief, and I was the only one available. The funeral program was a masterpiece of subtle exclusion. Eleanor had chosen a formal design with gold lettering, featuring David's graduation photo from Northwestern and a timeline of his accomplishments. His marriage to me rated a single line, survived by his wife Samantha, an unborn child. No mention of our love story, our dreams, the life we'd built together. I'd wanted to protest, to demand equal recognition, but grief had stolen my voice. The morning of the funeral, I'd stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, trying to find something appropriate that would fit my pregnant body. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt like enough armor for what was coming. The church was packed. David had been well-loved colleagues, clients, college friends, neighbors who'd watched him grow from a shy teenager into a confident man. I should have felt comforted by this outpouring of support, but instead I felt exposed. Like everyone was watching to see if my grief was genuine. Eleanor had positioned herself at the front of the church, accepting condolences with dignified grace. Marcus stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, the perfect grieving sum. I sat in the front pew, my hands folded over my belly, watching this performance of family solidarity from which I'd been quietly excluded. The whispers started during the organ prelude. She's so young. How long were they married? The pregnancy seems convenient. I caught fragments of conversation, each comment a small knife twist in my chest. Mrs. Henderson, a family friend, leaned toward her companion. Eleanor is handling this so well. It must be difficult with the girl expecting. And all. The girl, as if I was some teenage mistake rather than David's chosen wife. Reverend Williams spoke beautifully about David's character, his dedication to family, his bright future cut short. But even his words felt sanitized, edited to present a version of David that belonged entirely to his birth family. When he mentioned David's devoted wife, the words felt perfunctory, obligatory. The eulogy was Marcus's responsibility, and he delivered it with the same charm that had always made him the family favorite. He spoke of David's childhood, their shared adventures, inside jokes that excluded me entirely. David was my best friend, he said, his voice breaking authentically. He was the kind of man who would give you the shirt off his back, who saw the good in everyone, who believed in second chances. Second chances. The phrase hung in the air like an accusation. Was that what I'd been to David? A second chance at happiness after some unspecified disappointment. When Marcus finished, Eleanor stood to speak. This hadn't been planned. She'd insisted she was too overcome with grief, but she approached the podium with steady determination. My son was a good man, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the church. He was generous to a fault, always willing to help those less fortunate. He saw potential where others saw problems. Less fortunate, problems. The words were aimed directly at me, delivered with surgical precision. I felt the congregation's eyes turn toward me, assessing, judging. My face burned with humiliation, but I kept my expression neutral, my hands protective over my belly. David's greatest weakness was his inability to see when people were taking advantage of his kindness, Eleanor continued. He believed in love, in commitment, in doing the right thing even when it cost him dearly. That generosity of spirit is what made him special, and perhaps, she paused, her voice catching, perhaps it's what led to his death. The church fell silent. The accusation hung in the air like incense, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to stand up, to defend myself, to scream that I'd loved David more than life itself. But grief had paralyzed me, and the weight of public scrutiny kept me frozen in place. After the service, the procession to the cemetery felt endless. I rode in the family car with Eleanor and Marcus, the silence thick with unspoken recriminations. At the graveside, I stood apart from the Blake family cluster, my isolation complete and intentional. As they lowered David's casket into the ground, I felt something shift inside me. Not just grief, but a fierce protectiveness for the child I carried. Emma deserved better than this. She deserved to know her father's true story, not the sanitized version Eleanor was already constructing. The reception was held at Eleanor's house, the same garden where David and I had been married. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, accepting condolences that felt hollow and rehearsed. People spoke to me with the careful politeness reserved for uncomfortable strangers, as if my grief was somehow less valid than Eleanor's. "Such a shame," I heard someone whisper. "Eleanor raised such a good boy. It's hard to understand what he saw in her." By evening, I was exhausted and emotionally drained. The baby had been active all day, responding to my stress with kicks and movement that made me feel even more isolated. As I prepared to leave, Eleanor approached me with a small, tight smile. "Samantha, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I hope you understand that everything we're doing is for David's memory. We want to preserve his legacy. Properly." "I understand," I managed, though I didn't. "Not really." "Good, because there will be some legal matters to discuss soon. David's estate, his business interests. These things can be complicated, especially when there are," she glanced at my belly, "future considerations." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Eleanor was already planning her next move, already calculating how to minimize my role in David's life and legacy. But she'd underestimated one crucial factor: a mother's determination to protect her child. As I drove home through the darkening streets, I made a silent promise to David's memory and to our unborn daughter. Whatever Eleanor was planning, whatever legal battles lay ahead, I would be ready. The grieving widow they'd dismissed today would not be the woman they'd face tomorrow. David's will was dated just 6 months before his death, updated when we'd learned we are having a daughter. The document sat on Harold Brennan's mahogany desk like a loaded weapon, its legal language about to detonate years of family assumptions and expectations. Harold had been the Blake family attorney for over 20 years, a distinguished man in his 60s who'd handled everything from Eleanor's divorce to the incorporation of David's consulting firm. His office felt like a gentleman's club, all leather-bound books and heavy furniture designed to impress and intimidate. Eleanor sat across from me, her black suit pristine and her posture perfect. She'd brought Marcus for moral support, and he fidgeted in his chair like a man expecting bad news. I'd come alone, 7 months pregnant now, and feeling every extra pound as I struggled to find a comfortable position. "Before we begin," Harold said, adjusting his reading glasses, "I want to remind everyone that David was very specific about his wishes. He consulted with me extensively about these arrangements." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "David was always thoughtful about family responsibilities. I'm sure he's provided appropriately for everyone." The confidence in her voice made my stomach clench. What did she know that I didn't? What arrangements had been made without my knowledge? Harold cleared his throat and began reading. The legal language was dense and formal, but the meaning became clear quickly. David had left everything to me: the house, his business, all bank accounts, investments, and personal property. Everything except a small trust fund for Emma's education, which would be managed by me as her guardian. Eleanor's face went white. "There must be some mistake." "I'm afraid not," Harold said gently. "David was very clear about his intentions. He wanted to ensure that his wife and child would be financially secure. But what about the family business?" Marcus interjected, his voice tight with panic. "David promised he'd take care of me. I've been working there for 3 years." Harold consulted another document. David made provisions for employee severance, including a generous package for you, Marcus. However, ownership of the business transfers to Mrs. Blake. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel Eleanor's fury radiating across the room like heat from a furnace. Marcus looked like he might be sick. "This is impossible," Eleanor said finally, her voice shaking. "David would never have left me with nothing. I'm his mother." "You're provided for," Harold explained patiently. "There's a yearly allowance from the estate, and you have lifetime rights to stay in the family home if needed." But David felt strongly that his primary responsibility was to his immediate family. Immediate family. The words hung in the air like a verdict. After years of subtle exclusion, David had made his choice clear in the most legally binding way possible. He was manipulated. Eleanor said suddenly, turning to face me with undisguised hatred. She got pregnant on purpose, trapped him into marriage, and then convinced him to cut out his real family. "Eleanor, please," Harold began. "No, I won't be silent about this." Look at her sitting there, pretending to be shocked. She knew exactly what she was doing. David was a good man. Too good to see what she really was. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I'd known Eleanor resented me, but this level of venom was breathtaking. "Eleanor, I love David. I never asked him to love." She laughed. Bitterly. "You loved his money, his status, his family name. You saw a lonely man and decided he was your ticket to a better life." Marcus leaned forward, his face flushed with desperate anger. "Do you know what this means for me? I've got 2 kids, a mortgage, car payments. I was counting on that business to support my family, and I'm supposed to feel guilty about that." The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I was tired of being everyone's scapegoat. David built that business. He had the right to leave it to whomever he chose. He had responsibilities, Eleanor snapped, to his blood family, to the people who'd loved him since birth. I was his wife. I'm carrying his child. That makes me family too. Harold intervened before the argument could escalate further. "Perhaps we should schedule separate meetings to discuss the practical aspects of the estate transfer. These are emotional times, and there's no need to—" "There's every need," Eleanor said, standing abruptly. "This will is a fraud." David was, under duress, coerced by a woman who saw him as a meal ticket. "I'm going to contest it. On what grounds?" Harold asked, his professional composure slipping slightly. "Mental incapacity. Undue influence. Fraud. Whatever it takes." Eleanor's voice was cold and determined. "My son would never have abandoned his family for some gold-digging opportunist." The words stung because they echoed my own insecurities. Had I been good enough for David? Had our love been real, or had I been just another charitable case for his generous heart? But as I felt Emma kick strongly in my belly, I found my voice. "Contest it if you want, Eleanor, but you'll lose. David made his choice, and he made it freely. He chose his daughter's future over your sense of entitlement." "We'll see about that," she said, gathering her purse with sharp, angry movements. "Marcus, we're leaving." "Harold, you'll be hearing from my attorney." After they left, Harold and I sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, he spoke. "I'm sorry you had to witness that, Samantha. Eleanor is grieving, and grief can make people behave badly. Will she be able to contest the will successfully?" He considered the question carefully. "It's possible but unlikely." David was of sound mind when he made these arrangements. He consulted with me multiple times, asked detailed questions about the implications. There's no evidence of coercion or undue influence. But she'd try. Oh yes, she'd try. And it could get ugly. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the baby I carried, about the life David had wanted to build for us, about the future Eleanor was determined to steal. I'm prepared for whatever comes. As I drove home, I realized that the will reading had changed everything. Eleanor's mask had finally slipped, revealing the depth of her resentment and the length she'd go to destroy me. The legal battle ahead would be brutal, but at least now I knew what I was fighting for. David had given me more than money and property. He'd given me validation, proof that our love had been real and our marriage meaningful. Eleanor could contest the will, but she couldn't contest the truth. David had chosen me, chosen us, chosen our daughter's future over his family's expectations. War was just beginning, but I had something Eleanor didn't: the moral authority of being. David's chosen heir and the fierce determination of a mother protecting her child's legacy. Emma's hospital bracelet was so tiny it could barely fit around my thumb. Born at 34 weeks, she arrived 6 weeks early, her lungs struggling and her cries weak but determined. The stress of the legal battle had triggered early labor, and as I held her in the NICU, surrounded by machines and monitors, I felt the weight of every harsh word Eleanor had spoken. The doctors assured me that Emma would be fine, that many babies born at her gestational age went on to live completely normal lives. But watching her fight for every breath, her miniature fingers wrapped around my pinky, I couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor's cruelty had somehow reached into my womb and threatened my daughter's life. Stress can definitely be a factor in premature labor, Dr. Patterson had explained gently. Have you been experiencing unusual emotional strain? Unusual emotional strain. How do you explain to someone that your dead husband's family has declared war on your existence? That every day brings new accusations, new threats, new attempts to paint your marriage as an elaborate con. The NICU became my sanctuary. For 8 hours each day, I sat beside Emma's incubator, talking to her about her father, about the life we would build together, about the strong woman she would become. The nurses grew used to my presence, bringing me coffee and updates with professional kindness that felt more genuine than most of the sympathy I'd received. Eleanor visited exactly once, bringing flowers and wearing the expression of a martyr forced to perform an unpleasant duty. She stood at the foot of Emma's incubator for exactly 5 minutes, making appropriate cooing sounds while studying my daughter with calculating eyes. She's very small, Eleanor observed, as if this was somehow my fault. She'll grow, I replied, not looking away from Emma's perfect, tiny face. Children need stability, Samantha. They need family support, financial security, proper guidance. Being a single mother is difficult under the best circumstances. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Eleanor was already building her case for why Emma would be better off in her care. I thought of Marcus's gambling debts, of Eleanor's own history of poor financial decisions, and felt a surge of protective fury that surprised me with its intensity. Emma has family support, I said quietly. She has me. Eleanor's smile was sharp as a blade. Yes. Well, we'll see how that works out, won't we? After she left, I called my own mother for the first time since the funeral. Mum lived in Phoenix now, remarried to a kind man who sold insurance and played golf on weekends. She'd offered to come for the birth, but I'd been too proud to accept help, too determined to prove I could handle everything alone. Oh, sweetheart, Mum said when I told her about Emma's early arrival, I'm getting on the next plane. You shouldn't be dealing with this by yourself. I'm fine, Mom. Really, no, you're not. And that's okay. You don't have to be strong all the time. When Mom arrived 2 days later, she took one look at me, exhausted, overwhelmed, living on vending machine coffee and stress, and immediately took charge. She rented a hotel room near the hospital, brought home-cooked meals in thermos containers, and sat with Emma when I finally went home to shower and change clothes. That woman is poison, Mom said after I told her about Eleanor's visit. Pure poison. But don't let her see how much she's affecting you. Vultures like that feed on weakness. The legal bills were mounting faster than I'd anticipated. David's estate was substantial, but it was tied up in probate while Eleanor's attorney filed motion after motion challenging the will's validity. My own lawyer, Janet Morrison, was expensive but necessary, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in estate litigation. They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, Janet explained during one of our meetings. Mental incapacity, undue influence, fraud, even claims that the will was forged. None of it will hold up in court, but the process is designed to drain your resources and your resolve. How long will this take? Could be months. Could be years. Eleanor's attorney is dragging this out deliberately, hoping you'll accept a settlement rather than fight. But settlement felt like betrayal of David, of Emma, of the future he'd wanted for us. Every time I looked at my daughter's determined little face, I knew I had to fight. The harassment extended beyond the legal system. Anonymous letters arrived at my house, questioning my fitness as a mother, suggesting Emma would be better off with real family. My phone rang at all hours, with hang-up calls. Someone I suspected, Marcus, had been asking my neighbors pointed questions about my character, my habits, my visitors. The stress was affecting my milk supply, my sleep, my ability to think clearly. But whenever I felt like giving up, I'd look at Emma's hospital bracelet, that tiny symbol of her early struggle, and remember that she was counting on me to be stronger than my grief, stronger than their cruelty. One evening, as I sat feeding Emma in the hospital's family room, a social worker approached with a clipboard and a concerned expression. "Mrs. Blake? I'm Sarah Chun from Child Protective Services. We've received some concerns about your living situation." My blood turned to ice. What kind of concerns? Anonymous reports suggesting that stress and financial instability might be affecting your ability to care for your daughter properly. Eleanor's latest weapon was the state itself, using bureaucracy to question my fitness as a mother. As I answered Sarah's careful questions about my support system, my finances, my mental health, I realized that this was just the beginning. Eleanor wouldn't stop until she'd destroyed me completely, using every tool at her disposal to paint me as an unfit mother and a gold-digging fraud. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. By threatening Emma, she'd awakened something fierce and uncompromising in me. The grieving widow was gone, replaced by a mother who would fight with everything she had to protect her child. The journal was nothing special, a simple black notebook I'd bought at the drugstore for $3. But as I wrote my first entry, documenting Eleanor's visit to the NICU and her thinly veiled threats, I felt like I was taking back some measure of control in a situation that had spiraled far beyond my influence. Day 47 since David's death, I wrote. Eleanor visited Emma today, made comments about single motherhood being difficult, about Emma needing proper guidance, clear implication that she's building a case for custody. Note: check legal precedent for grandparent rights in Illinois. What had started as a way to process my grief became something more strategic, a detailed record of every interaction, every threat, every suspicious circumstance surrounding David's family. I documented phone calls, recorded dates and times of visits, noted witnesses to conversations. If Eleanor wanted to play legal games, I would make sure I had ammunition. It was during one of these late-night documentation sessions that I stumbled across something odd in David's business files. He'd always been meticulous about record-keeping, but there were gaps in the recent months: missing bank statements, incomplete client files, invoices that didn't match the accounting records. At first, I assumed it was simply the chaos that follows a sudden death. But as I dug deeper, comparing David's business calendar to his personal notes, patterns emerged that didn't make sense. Meetings he'd supposedly attended but hadn't recorded. Client payments that seemed too large for the services provided. Travel expenses that didn't match his actual trips. My background in pre-law had given me enough knowledge to recognize when something wasn't right. David's consulting firm specialized in helping small businesses optimize their operations. Routine work that shouldn't generate the kind of revenue reflected in some of these recent transactions. The breakthrough came when I found David's personal calendar hidden behind a stack of insurance papers. Unlike his business calendar, this one was brutally honest about his activities. And according to this record, David had been investigating irregularities in the company's finances for months before his death. Meeting with forensic accountant. Read one entry. Review M's expense reports. Read another. Marcus. David had been investigating his own brother. I cross-referenced the dates with David's business bank statements and felt my breath catch. Large withdrawals had been made regularly over the past year, always just under the threshold that would require additional documentation. The withdrawals were coded as business expenses, that they didn't correspond to any legitimate company costs. I could identify. Eleanor's financial situation became my next focus. Public records showed that she'd been struggling since her divorce 5 years earlier. Her alimony had run out. Her part-time job at an art gallery barely covered her expenses, and she'd taken out a substantial loan against her house just 6 months before David's death. Marcus's situation was even more dire. His credit report obtained through channels I preferred not to examine too closely showed a pattern of poor financial decisions stretching back years. Gambling debts, maxed out credit cards, a second mortgage on his house that he was already behind on. He needed money badly, and David's business had apparently provided it. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed professional help to understand the full scope of what I was discovering. I hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Robert Kane, who specialized in financial crimes. Rob was expensive, but he had the expertise and resources I lacked. "Your husband was building a case," Rob told me after reviewing the documents I'd gathered. These personal calendar entries, the forensic accountant consultation. He knew someone was stealing from the business. Marcus? Almost certainly. And possibly your mother-in-law. Some of these expense reimbursements were made directly to her for consulting services that don't appear to exist. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor and Marcus hadn't just been taking advantage of David's generosity. They'd been systematically stealing from him. And David had known, had been gathering evidence, had been preparing to confront them. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. Rob consulted his notes. "Conservatively, 200,000 over the past 18 months. Possibly more if this goes back further than we can currently document. $200,000. Enough to solve Marcus's gambling problems and Eleanor's financial crisis. Enough to provide serious motive for wanting David silenced before he could expose their theft." "There's something else," Rob said carefully. "The timing of that forensic accountant meeting. It was scheduled for the day after your husband died." The room seemed to tilt around me. "You think they knew?" "I think someone knew that David was getting close to the truth. Whether they knew about the specific meeting or just sensed that he was suspicious, I can't say. But the timing is awfully convenient." That night, I sat in Emma's nursery, holding her while she slept, trying to process what I'd learned. David hadn't just left me an inheritance. He'd left me evidence of his family's betrayal. They'd been stealing from him while smiling to his face, taking advantage of his generosity while planning my destruction. The next morning brought a new development. Janet Morrison called with news that Eleanor's legal team had filed additional motions, this time questioning the validity of David's business records and suggesting that I might have doctored financial documents to inflate the estate's value. "It's a fishing expedition," Janet explained. "They're hoping to force discovery that will let them examine all of David's business records. But given what you've found, this might actually work in our favor." "How so?" "Because if they want to examine David's financial records, we can examine theirs too. And based on what your investigator found, I think they have a lot more to hide than we do." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced since David's death, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. Eleanor and Marcus had stolen from my husband, threatened my child, and tried to destroy my reputation. But in their greed and arrogance, they'd left a paper trail that would be their undoing. The grieving widow was gone. In her place stood a woman with evidence, resources, and the determination to see justice done. Eleanor had wanted a fight now. She was going to get one. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my front door sometime during the night. No postmark, no return address, just my name written in block letters across cheap white paper. Inside, the message was brief and chilling. "Gold diggers don't deserve happy endings. Watch your back." I stared at the words, my hands trembling as Emma fussed in her carrier beside me. Someone had been close enough to my house to slide this under the door while I slept, while my infant daughter lay helpless upstairs. The violation felt almost as intense as physical assault. The harassment escalated quickly after that. Anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, heavy breathing or silence when I answered. My mailbox was vandalized twice, once with spray paint that called me a whore, another time filled with garbage and rotting food. Someone had been through my trash, spreading its contents across the front yard like evidence of some crime. Letters kept coming, each one more vicious than the last. Your baby deserves a real family. David would be ashamed of what you've become. Everyone knows what you really are. I saved them all, documenting each incident with photographs and detailed notes about when and where I'd found them. The online harassment was worse. Someone had created fake social media profiles using photos from David's funeral, posting lies about my character and our marriage. A Facebook page called Justice for David Blake featured doctored photos of me with other men, fabricated stories about affairs and gold-digging schemes, and detailed speculation about how I'd trapped David with pregnancy. The comments were brutal. She killed that poor man with her greed. Look at her fake tears at the funeral. She's already planning how to spend his money. Someone should take that baby away before she ruins another life. Each comment felt like a punch to the gut. But I forced myself to read them all, screenshot everything, build my case one cruel lie at a time. My neighbors began treating me differently. Mrs. Patterson, who'd brought casseroles after David's death, now crossed the street to avoid me. The mail carrier looked at me with obvious suspicion. Even the grocery store checkout clerks seemed to whisper when they saw me coming. Eleanor had been busy spreading her poison throughout our social circle, our neighborhood, anywhere people would listen. She presented herself as the grieving mother protecting her son's memory from a manipulative woman who'd somehow tricked him into marriage and fatherhood. The impact on my mental health was devastating. I found myself jumping at every sound, checking the locks multiple times before bed, installing a security system that I couldn't really afford. Emma seemed to sense my anxiety, becoming fussy and difficult to console. My milk supply dwindled further, adding guilt and frustration to an already overwhelming situation. Dr. Patterson referred me to a therapist, Dr. Sarah Williams, who specialized in grief counseling and trauma recovery. The first session was difficult. Admitting that I was struggling felt like giving Eleanor ammunition, but Sarah helped me understand that my reactions were normal responses to abnormal cruelty. What you're experiencing is a form of psychological warfare, she explained. Your husband's family is trying to break you down, make you question your own reality, force you to give up rather than fight. It's a deliberate strategy. How do I fight back without becoming like them? You document everything, which you're already doing. You build your support network. And you remember that their desperation suggests they're afraid, which means you have something they want to take away. The support network proved crucial. My mother extended her stay indefinitely, helping with Emma and providing a witness to the harassment. Rob Kane increased his investigation into Eleanor and Marcus's finances, uncovering a web of debt and poor decisions that painted them as the truly desperate parties in this conflict. But the most important ally came from an unexpected source. David's business partner, James Morrison, reached out after hearing rumors about the will contest. James had worked closely with David for 3 years and had intimate knowledge of the company's operations. I need to tell you something, James said during our first meeting. David came to me about 6 weeks before he died. He was concerned about some financial irregularities, asked me to help him review the books. What did you find? Exactly what you'd expect. Marcus had been treating the business like his personal piggy bank. Travel expenses for trips he never took, client entertainment charges for nights he spent at the casino, salary advances that were never repaid. David was furious. Did he confront Marcus about it? He was planning to, but he wanted all the evidence first. David was methodical about everything. He wouldn't accuse his brother without being absolutely certain. James paused, studying my face. The thing is, Samantha, Marcus knew David was onto him. I saw them arguing in the parking lot one evening, about a week before the accident. Marcus was begging David not to ruin his life, promising to pay everything back. The timeline was becoming clearer. David had discovered the theft, begun documenting evidence, and was preparing to confront his family when he died. Marcus had known exposure was imminent, and Eleanor had known her financial support was about to disappear. There's something else, James continued. The night David died, Marcus called me around midnight, said he'd heard about the accident, and wanted to know if David had left any business documents in the office. I thought it was strange. His brother had just died, and he was worried about paperwork. What did you tell him? That everything was locked up and would stay that way until the estate was settled. But he kept pushing, asking about specific files, certain client records. It felt wrong, you know? That evening I called Rob Kane with this new information. The harassment campaign suddenly made more sense. Eleanor and Marcus weren't just trying to destroy my reputation for emotional reasons. They were trying to discredit me before I could discover and expose their theft. They're in full panic mode, Rob explained. If the will contest fails and you inherit everything, you'll have access to all of David's business records. You'll see exactly what they've been doing. So this is all about covering up their crimes, partly, but it's also about the money. If they can prove you're an unfit mother or a gold digger, they might be able to claim guardianship of Emma and control her inheritance until she's 18. That's a lot of years to skim from a substantial estate. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it meant they would stop at nothing to destroy me. Liberating because it meant their attacks were born of desperation, not strength. They weren't fighting from a position of moral authority. They were fighting to avoid prison. As I tucked Emma into her crib that night, I made a silent promise. The harassment would continue, probably get worse before it got better. But every cruel letter, every vicious lie, every attempt to break my spirit was also evidence of their guilt. They were destroying themselves with their own cruelty, and I was documenting every moment of their downfall. David's hidden bank statements were tucked inside a manila envelope, taped to the bottom of his desk drawer like something from a spy movie. I might never have found them if I hadn't been looking for the spare key to his filing cabinet. The envelope was unmarked, sealed, and when I opened it, my understanding of the past year shifted completely. The account was at a different bank, one David had never mentioned. The statements went back 18 months and told a story of systematic financial monitoring that painted my husband as far more suspicious and far more careful than I'd ever realized. Every questionable expense from Marcus had been tracked. Every unusual transfer to Eleanor had been documented. David hadn't just noticed the theft, he'd been building a forensic accounting case that would have sent both of them to prison. The account contained copies of cancelled checks, wire transfer, receipts, and detailed notes in David's careful handwriting. M withdrew $5,000 cash advance 3/5, claimed client dinner in Milwaukee, checked no client meetings scheduled that week. M was in Atlantic City, casino receipt found in company car. Another note, E-billed company $2,400 for marketing consultation in February. No marketing work performed. Same amount as her mortgage payment. Public record. The pattern was extensive and damning. Marcus had been stealing approximately $8,000 to $12,000 per month for over a year, using his position as David's brother and business partner to write checks, authorize transfers, and create fake expense reports. Eleanor had been receiving regular consulting fees that corresponded exactly to her monthly bills, mortgage, utilities, car payment, credit card minimums. But the most shocking discovery was a letter David had written but never sent, dated just 3 days before his death. Marcus and Mom, I know what you've been doing. I've documented everything, every fake expense, every unauthorized withdrawal, every fraudulent consulting fee. You've stolen nearly $200,000 from the company I built to secure my family's future. I want to handle this privately, within the family, but I need full repayment within 30 days and your written admission of guilt. If you refuse, I'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement. You've betrayed my trust and stolen from my daughter's future. I won't let that stand. We'll meet Friday to discuss terms. David. Friday. The day after David died, I sat in his office, Emma sleeping in her carrier beside me, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. David had been planning to confront them, demand restitution, possibly send them to prison. He'd been protecting not just his business, but Emma's inheritance and my future security. The hidden account contained something else. Copies of emails between Marcus and Eleanor discussing their situation. David had somehow intercepted their communications, probably through shared family accounts or simple passwords. Eleanor to Marcus, dated 1 week before David's death. He's getting suspicious. You need to be more careful with the expense reports. Marcus to Eleanor, same day. It's too late for careful. He's already on to us. We need to figure out what he knows and how to handle it. Eleanor to Marcus, 2 days later. Maybe it's time to remind him that family loyalty goes both ways. He wouldn't want to destroy his brother's life over money. Marcus to Eleanor, the day before David died. Loyalty? He's married to that gold digger and thinks she's more important than his real family. If he forces this issue, he'll regret it. I read that last message 3 times, my hands shaking. The implied threat was unmistakable. Had Marcus been angry enough, desperate enough, to cause David's accident? The police report said there was no evidence of foul play, but what if they hadn't been looking for the right evidence? I called Rob Kane immediately, despite the late hour. We need to look at David's accident again, I told him. I found something. When Rob arrived an hour later, I showed him everything: the hidden account, the intercepted emails, David's unsent letter. He studied the documents with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent decades building criminal cases. This changes everything, he said finally. We're not just talking about estate fraud anymore. This is evidence of motive for murder. Murder? The police said the police investigated a traffic accident. They weren't looking for financial motive or family conspiracy. But look at this timeline. David discovers the theft, gathers evidence, plans a confrontation, and dies the night before he was going to expose them. That's not coincidence. We spent the rest of the night going through David's evidence, organizing it chronologically, building a picture of systematic theft and family betrayal that would have destroyed Eleanor and Marcus's lives if exposed. The amount stolen was enough to constitute a felony. The family's financial desperation was documented and severe. The threats in those emails suggested they were willing to go to any length to protect themselves. What do we do with this? I asked as dawn broke outside David's office window. First, we secure all of this evidence. Multiple copies, safe deposit box, cloud storage. We make sure it can't disappear. Then we take it to the police and demand they reopen the accident investigation. And if they won't, then we use it in the will contest. Because even if we can't prove murder, we can certainly prove that Eleanor and Marcus are thieves who've been systematically stealing from the estate they're now trying to claim. No judge will award custody or inheritance rights to criminals. The irony was brutal and perfect. Eleanor and Marcus had been fighting to prove I was a gold digger who'd manipulated David for financial gain. But the evidence showed that they were the ones who'd been stealing from him, manipulating his generosity and threatening his security. As I carefully replaced the hidden account statements in their envelope, I thought about David's last days. Stress he must have felt, the betrayal, the difficulty of planning to destroy his own family to protect his wife and daughter. He died carrying the burden of their crimes, never getting the chance to confront them or seek justice, but he'd left me the tools to finish what he'd started. Every document, every email, every careful note was a weapon in the war his family had declared on me. They'd underestimated the quiet widow, dismissed me as a grieving victim who would crumble under pressure. They had no idea that David had trained me to fight, that he'd left me an arsenal of evidence, that their own cruelty had given me the motivation to see this through to the end. The theft they'd committed in secret would be exposed in court. The threats they'd made in private would become public record. The family they tried to protect through lies would be destroyed by the truth. Emma stirred in her carrier, making the soft sounds that meant she was waking up. I lifted her carefully, holding her against my chest as I looked around David's office one last time. This room had been his sanctuary, the place where he'd built his business and planned our future. Now it was the place where I'd found the evidence to secure Emma's inheritance and deliver justice for his memory. "Your daddy was a smart man," I whispered to Emma. "He made sure we'd be okay, no matter what happened. And now we're going to make sure the people who hurt him get exactly what they deserve." The legal correspondence arrived by certified mail on a grey October morning, 3 months after I'd found David's hidden evidence. The return address showed Harold Brennan's law firm, but the tone of the letter was nothing like the professional courtesy he'd shown during the will reading. This was a declaration of war, dressed in legal language, but unmistakably hostile in intent. "Dear Mrs. Blake," it began, "my clients have requested that I inform you of their intention to pursue all available legal remedies to protect the interests of the Blake family estate and minor child, Emma Blake. Recent discoveries regarding your character and conduct during your marriage to David Blake have raised serious concerns about your fitness as a guardian and your entitlement to inherit under the disputed will." I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each pass. Harold was supposed to be the family attorney, neutral and professional, but this letter read like a prosecutor's opening statement, filled with accusations and threats that had Eleanor's fingerprints all over them. The letter went on to detail a litany of alleged misconduct, financial impropriety, emotional manipulation of David, possible adultery, and serious questions about your mental stability and capacity to provide proper care for a minor child. Each accusation was carefully worded to avoid outright defamation while maximizing damage to my reputation. But the most chilling part came in the final paragraph. My clients believe that David Blake's tragic death may have been precipitated by emotional distress caused by discoveries about your true character. They intend to pursue wrongful death claims in addition to the will contest, seeking full custody of Emma Blake and complete forfeiture of any inheritance claims. Wrongful death. They were actually claiming that I had somehow caused David's accident through emotional distress. The audacity was breathtaking, but the legal implications were terrifying. If they could convince a judge that my alleged misconduct had contributed to David's death, they might be able to void the will entirely and claim everything. I called Janet Morrison immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. "They're escalating," I told her. "Harold Brennan just sent me a letter that basically accuses me of killing my husband." "Forward me the letter immediately," Janet said, her voice sharp with concern. "And don't respond to it or any other communications." From Harold's office. This changes the entire dynamic of the case. When we met later that day, Janet's expression was grim. "Harold's crossed a line here. This letter contains allegations that could be considered defamatory if he can't prove them, but more importantly, it reveals their entire strategy, which is total destruction. They're not just trying to contest the will anymore. They're trying to paint you as mentally unstable, morally corrupt, and possibly criminal. If they succeed, they can claim that any inheritance you receive would be against public policy." The coordinated nature of their attack was becoming clear. The anonymous harassment, the social media lies, the CPS complaints, everything had been building toward this moment when Harold would present me as a woman so thoroughly discredited that no court could possibly rule in my favor. But Janet had news that changed everything. "I've been doing some digging into Harold's relationship with the Blake family," she said, pulling out a thick folder. "And I found some very interesting connections." The documents she showed me revealed a web of financial relationships that made Harold far from the neutral family attorney he'd presented himself to be. Eleanor had borrowed money from Harold's personal investment account 6 months before David's death. Marcus had used Harold as a reference for a business loan that he'd defaulted on. Most damning of all, Harold's law firm had been handling the incorporation of a new business venture, a partnership between Eleanor and Marcus that would have been funded by profits from David's consulting company. They were planning to take over David's business, Janet explained. Harold helped them set up the legal structure to do it. That's why he's fighting so hard against the will. If you inherit, their little scheme falls apart. The dates were crucial. The new business entity had been incorporated just 2 weeks before David's death, when he was already investigating the financial irregularities. Eleanor and Marcus hadn't just been stealing from David, they'd been planning to steal his entire company. There's more, Janet continued. I found evidence that Harold was advising them on how to contest the will before David was even dead. These legal strategies weren't developed after the will reading, they were planned in advance. She showed me email correspondence between Harold and Eleanor, discussing various grounds for challenging David's will and questioning my fitness as a mother. The emails were dated a full month before David's accident. How is that even possible? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Because they knew David was planning to change his will. He'd consulted with another attorney about updating his estate plan to provide even more protection for you and Emma. Harold found out and warned Eleanor. The conspiracy was deeper than I'd imagined. Harold hadn't just been representing Eleanor. After David's death, he'd been helping her prepare for it. The will contest, the character assassination, the custody threats, everything had been orchestrated in advance by people who were supposed to be David's trusted advisors. Can we use this against them? Absolutely. Harold has massive conflicts of interest that should have disqualified him from representing Eleanor in the first place. His financial relationships with both Eleanor and Marcus make his legal advice ethically questionable at best. But the most explosive discovery came when Janet cross-referenced Harold's calendar with the timeline of David's investigation. Harold had met with Eleanor and Marcus on the same day. David had scheduled his confrontation with them, the day after he died. Look at this, Janet said, pointing to a calendar entry. Harold's assistant confirmed this meeting. 3 hours, Eleanor. And Marcus, the day David was supposed to expose their theft. They weren't just planning to contest the will, they were planning damage control for when David revealed their crimes. The implications were staggering. David's family hadn't just stolen from him, they'd been prepared for the possibility that he'd discover their theft. Harold had been helping them plan their defense before David even knew he needed to mount an offense. What happens now? I asked. Now we file a motion to disqualify Harold from representing Eleanor due to conflicts of interest. We expose his financial relationships and his pre-planning of the will contest. And we use all of this to show that the real criminals in this case are the people pointing fingers at you. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced since David's death, genuine hope that justice was possible. Eleanor and Marcus had made a crucial mistake in trusting Harold to coordinate their attack. His greed and conflicts of interest had created a paper trail that exposed their entire conspiracy. The harassment campaign, the legal threats, the character assassination, all of it was about to backfire spectacularly. They tried to destroy me with lies while hiding their own crimes. But David's careful documentation and Harold's sloppy ethics had given me everything. I needed to turn their weapons against them. Emma was napping when I got home, her peaceful face a reminder of what this fight was really about. Not money, not pride, not even justice for David, though all of those mattered. This was about ensuring that my daughter grew up knowing the truth about her father, about the people who'd betrayed him, and about the mother who'd fought to protect. His legacy. The letter from Harold's office was still sitting on my kitchen counter, its threats and accusations now seeming hollow and desperate. They'd revealed their hand too early, shown their desperation, exposed their own corruption in their eagerness to destroy me. The custody threat document arrived on Emma's 6-month birthday, as if Eleanor had deliberately chosen the cruelest possible timing. The legal papers were thick and official, filed in family court, and demanding emergency custody of my daughter based on what they called substantial evidence of maternal unfitness and endangerment of a minor child. I sat at my kitchen table, reading through page after page of allegations, while Emma played in her bouncy seat nearby, oblivious to the legal bomb that had just exploded in our lives. According to Eleanor's petition, I was a mentally unstable gold digger who posed an active danger to my own child. The document painted a picture of me that was almost unrecognizable, a woman who trapped David through deception, manipulated him into marriage, and was now using his death to live a lifestyle I hadn't earned. They claimed I'd been neglecting Emma's medical needs, that my obvious mental breakdown was affecting my ability to provide proper care, and that Emma would be significantly better served in the custody of her loving grandmother. The evidence they cited was a masterpiece of distortion. My frequent visits to Dr. Williams, the therapist, were presented as proof of mental instability rather than healthy grief processing. The security system I'd installed was characterized as paranoid behavior indicating possible drug use or criminal activity. Even my careful documentation of their harassment was twisted into evidence of obsessive and potentially dangerous fixation on imagined persecution. But the most devastating allegation was buried in the middle of the document. They claimed to have credible witness testimony that I'd been neglecting Emma's basic needs, leaving her unattended, failing to maintain proper hygiene, showing signs of postpartum depression so severe that it posed a risk to both our safety. Knew exactly where this witness testimony was coming from. The social worker who'd visited after their anonymous CPS report had been professional and thorough, ultimately finding no evidence of neglect or abuse. But her initial visit and follow-up questions had apparently been enough for Eleanor's lawyers to craft a narrative of maternal unfitness. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. Emergency as if Emma were in immediate physical danger from the mother who'd spent 6 months devotedly caring for her, who'd fought through grief and harassment to provide her with love, security, and everything she needed. I called Janet Morrison, with shaking hands. "They're trying to take Emma," I said, my voice barely steady enough to form the words. "I know. I just received a copy. This is exactly what we expected them to do, escalate to the nuclear option when everything else failed. Can they win? Can they actually take her away from me?" Janet was quiet for a moment, and that silence terrified me more than any shouting could have. "It's going to be a fight, Samantha. They've put together a compelling narrative, and family courts tend to err on the side of caution when child welfare is involved, but we have advantages they don't know about." The next few days were a blur of preparation and panic. Janet worked around the clock to file our response, marshalling character witnesses, medical records, and documentation of Eleanor's own unfitness as a potential guardian. But I could see the concern in her eyes. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my fundamental right to raise my own child. My mother flew back from Phoenix immediately, taking one look at the custody papers and declaring war on Eleanor Blake. "Over my dead body," she said simply. "That woman is not taking my granddaughter." Dr. Williams provided a detailed report on my mental health, documenting my progress through grief counseling and explicitly stating that I showed no signs of depression or instability that would interfere with parenting. Emma's pediatrician wrote a glowing assessment of my care, noting that my daughter was thriving physically and developmentally, but the most powerful weapon in our arsenal was evidence. Eleanor didn't know we had David's hidden bank statements, the documentation of theft, the proof that she and Marcus were criminals who'd systematically stolen from Emma's inheritance. "Here's what's going to happen," Janet explained. "They're going to present their case about your unfitness, thinking they have the moral high ground. And then we're going to destroy their credibility by proving they're thieves and liars who've been stealing from the child they claim to want to protect." The night before the hearing, I sat in Emma's nursery, holding her while she slept, trying to memorize every detail of her perfect face. The thought of losing her, even temporarily, was unbearable. She was all I had left of David, the physical manifestation of our love and dreams. "I won't let them take you," I whispered to her sleeping form. "Whatever it costs, whatever I have to do, you're staying with me." But as confident as Janet tried to sound, I knew family court could be unpredictable. Judges were required to put the child's best interests first, and Eleanor had crafted a narrative that painted her as the stable, established family member while I was the young, grief-stricken outsider struggling to cope. The irony was crushing. Eleanor was fighting for custody of the granddaughter whose inheritance she'd been stealing, claiming to protect a child she'd actively tried to harm through her attacks on the child's mother. She wanted to control Emma not out of love, but out of greed and the desire to cover up her crimes. I thought about David's letter to his family, the confrontation he'd planned for the day after he died. He'd known what they were, had documented their betrayal, had been prepared to destroy them to protect Emma's future. Now it was my turn to finish what he'd started. Eleanor thought she held all the cards, the respectable grandmother versus the unstable young mother. But she'd underestimated the evidence David had left behind, and the lengths a mother would go to protect her child. The custody hearing would be more than a legal proceeding. It would be a reckoning, not just for Eleanor's lies about my character, but for her theft from Emma's inheritance, her harassment of a grieving widow, and her attempts to destroy the family David had chosen over the one he'd been born into. As Emma stirred in my arms, I made a final promise. Tomorrow, the world would learn the truth about Eleanor Blake. The masks would come off, the lies would be exposed, and justice would finally be served. Whatever happened, I would make sure that Emma grew up knowing her mother had fought for her with everything she had. James Morrison's testimony was typed on official letterhead, notarized and witnessed, a formal document that would serve as ammunition in the custody battle. But more than that, it was validation proof that David's love for me had been real and observable to the people who knew him best. "I worked closely with David Blake for 3 years, the statement began, "and I can attest without reservation that his marriage to Samantha was genuine, loving, and the source of tremendous happiness in his life. Any suggestion that she manipulated or deceived him is not only false but insulting to David's memory and intelligence." James had spent hours crafting the document, consulting with his own attorney to ensure every word would carry maximum legal weight. He detailed David's excitement about becoming a father, his frequent mentions of how much he loved and respected me, and his anger when he discovered his family's theft. David spoke often about his wife's intelligence, her strength, and her unwavering support of his goals, the statement continued. He was planning to expand the business specifically to provide greater financial security for his growing family. The idea that Samantha was somehow a burden or manipulation is contradicted by every interaction I witnessed. But James wasn't. The only ally stepping forward, Dr. Patricia Martinez, our former marriage counselor, provided a statement detailing the sessions David and I had attended while planning for Emma's arrival. We'd sought counseling not because our marriage was in trouble, but because David had wanted to ensure we were prepared for the transition to parenthood. David and Samantha Blake demonstrated one of the strongest, most committed partnerships I've encountered in my practice, Dr. Martinez wrote. Their mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared commitment to building a family was evident in every session. David spoke frequently about his gratitude for having found a partner who truly understood and supported him. The statements kept coming. Professor Williams from Northwestern, who taught both David and me in constitutional law, remembered our relationship fondly and could attest to its genuine beginning. "They were clearly smitten with each other," she wrote. "David would light up whenever Samantha entered the classroom, and she was equally devoted to him. Their partnership was built on shared intellectual interests and genuine compatibility." David's college roommate, Michael Chen, provided perhaps the most powerful testimony. He'd stayed in touch with David throughout our marriage and had been planning to be Emma's godfather before the accident. "David called me the night he proposed to Samantha," Michael's statement read. "He was over the moon, talking about how he'd finally found someone who made him want to be a better man." In all the years I knew him, I never saw David happier than he was with Samantha. She brought out the best in him, encouraged his ambitions, and supported his dreams. Any portrayal of her as manipulative or calculating is the opposite of everything I observed. Each statement was a piece of armor against Eleanor's accusations. That they were also something more precious confirmation that the love David and I had shared was real and recognized by everyone who'd witnessed it. Eleanor could manipulated her son, that she couldn't explain away years of testimony from people who'd watched our relationship develop. Janet Morrison coordinated the gathering of evidence with military precision. She'd reached out to everyone who'd known David and me as a couple, collecting statements that painted a picture of genuine love and partnership that contradicted every element of Eleanor's narrative. Our landlord from the apartment we'd shared before buying the house wrote about David's obvious devotion, how he'd always spoken of me with pride and affection. The contractor who'd helped us renovate the nursery described David's excitement about becoming a father and his constant references to how lucky he felt to have found me. Even mundane interactions became evidence of our authentic relationship. The woman who'd sold us Emma's crib remembered David's insistence on buying the safest model available, his questions about every safety feature, his obvious excitement about preparing for his daughter's arrival. He kept talking about how his wife had done all this research into the best products, she wrote. He was so proud of how thorough and careful she was being about preparing for the baby. He said she was going to be an amazing mother. Dr. Patterson, who delivered Emma, provided medical testimony about my commitment to prenatal care, my attention to every detail of my pregnancy, and David's involvement in every appointment. Mr. Blake was present for every major milestone, she wrote. His devotion to his wife and unborn child was evident to my entire staff. The character witnesses weren't just defending me, they were demolishing Eleanor's entire narrative. How could I have been a gold digger when I'd worked full-time throughout our relationship? How could I have trapped David when our relationship had developed slowly over months? How could I have manipulated him when every witness described him as happy, fulfilled, and genuinely in love? That perhaps the most damaging testimony to Eleanor's case came from an unexpected source, David's former secretary, Maria Santos, who'd worked at the consulting firm for 5 years before retiring. Mrs. Blake called me after the custody papers were filed, Maria told Janet during their interview. She wanted to understand the family dynamics better. What I told her would probably help her case. Maria's statement revealed years of uncomfortable interactions with Eleanor and Marcus, their constant requests for money, their obvious resentment of David's success, and their growing hostility toward me. Mr. David was always generous with his family, Maria wrote, but they took advantage of his kindness. His mother would call constantly asking for money, always with some emergency or crisis. Marcus was worse, he acted like the business owed him a living, even though he contributed very little. More damaging still, Maria had witnessed the family's reaction to David's marriage. When Mr. David announced his engagement, his mother's exact words were, "Well, I suppose she's trapped him now." Marcus said something crude about how quickly some women could lock down a successful man. It was clear they resented Mrs. Blake from the beginning. As we compiled the character witness statements, a clear picture emerged, not just of my innocence, but of Eleanor's guilt. Every person who'd known David described the same thing, a man genuinely happy in his marriage, excited about fatherhood, and increasingly frustrated with his family's financial demands and judgment of his wife. The night before the custody hearing, I read through all the statements one final time. Each one was a gift validation that the life David and I had built together had been real, meaningful, and observed by people who cared about us. Eleanor had spent months trying to rewrite history, portraying me as a manipulative outsider who'd somehow fooled everyone. But the truth was more powerful than her lies, and the people who'd witnessed our love were ready to testify to its authenticity. Tomorrow, Eleanor would face not just my legal team, but a chorus of voices speaking for David's memory and our genuine partnership. She'd built her case on the assumption that no one would defend me, that I was isolated and vulnerable. She was about to learn how wrong she'd been. The financial audit report was 3 inches thick, bound in black covers and stamped with the seal of Hartland and Associates, one of Chicago's most respected forensic accounting firms. Rob Kane had spared no expense in commissioning the most thorough analysis possible of David's business finances, and the results were devastating for Eleanor and Marcus. Executive summary, the report began. Our investigation has identified systematic embezzlement totaling $247,000 over an 18-month period, perpetrated by Marcus Blake and Eleanor Blake through a combination of fraudulent expense reports, unauthorized withdrawals, and fictitious consulting agreements. The audit had uncovered everything David had suspected and more. Marcus's gambling addiction was documented through casino records, hotel receipts, and travel expenses that coincided with major sporting events and poker tournaments. Eleanor's consulting fees were exposed as monthly payments that exactly matched her personal expenses, with no corresponding work product or legitimate business purpose. But the most damning discovery was the paper trail showing coordination between them. Bank records revealed that Eleanor had often deposited her fraudulent consulting payments and immediately transferred portions to Marcus to cover his gambling debts. They hadn't just been stealing independently, they'd been operating as a team. The pattern of theft escalated significantly in the months preceding David Blake's death, the report noted. This coincides with documented evidence that Mr. Blake had begun investigating financial irregularities and planned to confront the perpetrators. The audit included forensic analysis of deleted emails, recovered through professional data recovery services. The communications between Eleanor and Marcus revealed not just the scope of their theft, but their awareness that David was closing in on them. Eleanor to Marcus. 6 weeks before David's death, he's asking too many questions about the quarterly reports. You need to clean up your expense submissions. Marcus to Eleanor. 4 weeks before, it's too late for cleaning up. He knows something. We need to figure out damage control. Eleanor to Marcus. 2 weeks before, I've talked to Harold about our options. If David forces this issue, we'll destroy him in court. No one will believe his word over family. Marcus to Eleanor. 1 week before David's death, family loyalty only goes so far. If he tries to ruin us, we'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman he really married. The threatening tone of the messages was unmistakable, but more importantly, they proved premeditation. Eleanor and Marcus hadn't just been stealing. They'd been planning their defense and counterattack long before David died. The audit also revealed the new business entity Harold had helped them incorporate, Blake Family Consulting, designed to take over David's client relationships and contracts. The incorporation papers listed Eleanor as president and Marcus as vice president, with plans to transfer David's business assets to the new company upon resolution of estate matters. They weren't just stealing from David, Rob explained as we reviewed the report. They were planning a complete takeover of his business empire. If David had lived to confront them, they would have claimed he was unstable, forced him out of his own company, and taken everything. The evidence went beyond financial crimes. The audit had traced the source of the anonymous harassment I'd been receiving. Payments from Eleanor's checking account to a private investigation firm that specialized in reputation management and background verification. She'd literally been paying people to stalk and harass me. Phone records showed a pattern of coordination between Eleanor, Marcus, and Harold Brennan that extended far beyond normal attorney-client communications. They'd been meeting regularly for months before David's death, planning strategies that assumed he would either be discredited or eliminated as an obstacle to their plans. But perhaps the most shocking discovery was evidence that they'd been monitoring David's activities in the weeks before his death. The private investigation firm Eleanor had hired to harass me had originally been tasked with following David, documenting his meetings with the forensic accountant, and reporting on his investigation into their theft. They knew exactly what David was planning, the audit concluded. The timeline suggests they had advance warning of his intention to confront them on the Friday following his death. Armed with this evidence, Janet Morrison filed a motion to dismiss Eleanor's custody petition and countersued for fraud, embezzlement, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The financial audit became Exhibit A in a case that transformed Eleanor from accuser to defendant. Your Honor, Janet argued in her filing, this custody petition is not brought in good faith concern for the child's welfare, but as part of a continuing conspiracy to steal from the Blake estate and cover up substantial financial crimes. The petitioners are criminals who have systematically stolen from the very child they now claim to want to protect. The response from Harold's office was swift and desperate. They filed motions to exclude the financial evidence as irrelevant to custody matters, to challenge the audit's methodology, and to claim attorney-client privilege over the communications. The audit had uncovered that, but their desperation was showing. Harold's own financial entanglements with Eleanor and Marcus had been exposed in the audit, revealing loans, investments, and business relationships that created massive conflicts of interest. His representation of Eleanor in the custody case was ethically questionable at best, criminal conspiracy at worst. The local legal community began taking notice. Bar Association ethics investigators opened a preliminary inquiry into Harold's conduct. The prosecutor's office requested copies of the financial audit to evaluate potential criminal charges against Eleanor and Marcus. Most importantly, Judge Rebecca Martinez, who was presiding over the custody case, ordered an emergency review of all evidence before proceeding with hearings. The discovery of systematic theft by the people seeking custody of a child created obvious concerns about their fitness as potential guardians. The court is troubled by allegations that the petitioners may have committed substantial financial crimes against the estate, from which they now seek to benefit, Judge Martinez wrote in her order. Before proceeding with custody determinations, the court requires a full accounting of all financial irregularities and their potential impact on the child's best interests. Eleanor's carefully constructed narrative was collapsing under the weight of documented evidence. She could no longer present herself as the responsible family member protecting her granddaughter from an unstable mother. Instead, she was revealed as a thief who'd stolen from her own granddaughter's inheritance while attempting to destroy the child's mother through lies and harassment. The audit report became more than evidence. It became vindication. Every accusation Eleanor had made against me was contradicted by her own criminal behavior. Every claim about my unfitness as a mother was undermined by her documented theft from Emma's future doc. As I held Emma that night, reading through the executive summary one more time, I felt something I hadn't experienced since David's death: complete confidence that justice would prevail. The evidence was overwhelming. The documentation was professional and thorough, and Eleanor's lies were finally exposed to the harsh light of truth. David's careful investigation had provided the foundation, but the professional audit had built an unassailable case. Eleanor and Marcus had stolen nearly $250,000 from their own family, and now the entire world would know exactly what they were. The custody hearing would proceed, but now it would be Eleanor on trial, not me. The question wouldn't be whether I was fit to raise my daughter, but whether criminals who'd stolen from that daughter should be allowed anywhere near her. The voice recordings were stored on my phone, backed up to 3 different cloud services, and copied to a secure drive that Janet kept in her office safe. 47 minutes of Eleanor and Marcus discussing their crimes, their lies, and their plans to destroy me captured during what they thought was a private family meeting to coordinate their legal strategy. The recording session had been Rob Kane's idea. They're going to want to meet with you before the custody hearing, he'd predicted. They'll try to intimidate you into accepting a settlement or withdrawing your claims. When they do, we'll be ready. He'd been right. 2 days after the financial audit was filed with the court, Eleanor had called with an offer to discuss the situation privately, for Emma's sake. The meeting was arranged for neutral ground, the law offices of Harold Brennan, where Eleanor felt safe and confident. What she didn't know was that Illinois was a one-party consent state for recordings, and I had every legal right to document our conversation. The tiny recording device Rob had provided was virtually undetectable, pinned inside my jacket like a decorative brooch. Eleanor had come prepared for intimidation, bringing Marcus for support and Harold for legal backup. They'd arranged themselves around the conference table like a tribunal, clearly expecting me to crumble under the pressure of facing them united. "Samantha," Eleanor began, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "we need to end this destructive fighting. It's not good for Emma, and it's not what David would have wanted." "I agree," I replied calmly. "David wouldn't have wanted his family stealing from his daughter's inheritance." The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. Harold cleared his throat. "Now, let's not make accusations we can't prove." "Oh, I can prove them," I interrupted, placing a copy of the financial audit on the table. $247,000. "That's how much you've stolen." Marcus leaned forward aggressively. "You have no idea what you're talking about. David gave us that money willingly. We were helping with the family business. By gambling it away in Atlantic City. By paying Eleanor's mortgage with fake consulting fees. That's an interesting definition of helping." Eleanor's mask finally slipped. "You arrogant little bitch. You think you can waltz into our family and destroy everything we've built. I think I can protect my daughter from thieves who've been stealing her inheritance. That money belonged to the family long before you trapped David with your pregnancy." Eleanor snapped. "You got pregnant on purpose, didn't you? Saw a successful man and decided to lock him down before he realized what you really were." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Everyone knows what you are, Samantha. A gold digger who saw an opportunity and took it. David was too good to see through your act." "My act?" I kept my voice steady, knowing every word was being recorded. "What act was that, exactly?" "The loving wife routine," Eleanor said bitterly. "The grieving widow performance. You never loved David, you loved his money, his status, his family name. You saw a lonely man and decided he was your ticket to a better life. And now you're trying to steal Emma's inheritance to cover your gambling debts and failed investments," I replied. "Tell me, how much do you owe the casinos, Marcus? How much did you lose at poker games while David was working to support his family?" Marcus's face flushed red. "That's none of your business. And it's not gambling, it's investing. I was trying to build something for the family. By stealing from the family business, by forging expense reports, by lying to your own brother." "David owed us," Eleanor interjected. "We raised him, supported him, helped him build that business. We had every right to benefit from our investment in his success." The admission was clear and unambiguous. She was justifying the theft, confirming everything the audit had documented. Harold tried to regain control. "Perhaps we should focus on reaching a settlement that serves everyone's interests." "Whose interests are those, Harold?" I asked. "The interests of your clients who've been paying you under the table. The interests of the new business entity you helped them incorporate to steal David's company." Harold's face went pale. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts that are documented in bank records, emails, and incorporation papers. You've been helping them plan this theft for months." Eleanor stood up abruptly. "Enough. We're not going to sit here and be accused by some opportunistic tramp who what, Eleanor? Who loved your son? Who gave birth to his daughter? Who's been protecting his legacy while you've been stealing from it?" "You killed him," she said suddenly, her voice shaking with rage. "Your demands, your pressure, your gold-digging expectations, you worked him to death. David died because of you." The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus nodded agreement. "He was killing himself trying to provide for you and that baby. Working 18-hour days, stressed out of his mind, driving himself into the ground because nothing was ever enough for you. That's rich, coming from people who were stealing thousands of dollars every month from his business accounts." "We weren't stealing," Eleanor snapped. "We were taking what was rightfully ours." David was family. He had obligations to us that went beyond some marriage certificate. Obligations that included covering your mortgage payments, your car loans, Marcus's gambling debts. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. You don't understand family loyalty. You don't understand what David owed us for everything we'd done for him. I understand that you've been systematically stealing from your own granddaughter's inheritance while trying to destroy her mother's reputation. Eleanor's voice turned cold and calculating. That granddaughter would be better off with real family, with people who understand responsibility and tradition, not some gold-digging opportunist who trapped her son with pregnancy. And if you get custody, you'll have control of her inheritance until she's 18. Very convenient for people who need money to cover their theft. We're not thieves, Harold interjected weakly. There may have been some accounting irregularities, but $247,000 isn't an irregularity, Harold. It's embezzlement. And your involvement makes you a co-conspirator. Eleanor gathered her purse with sharp, angry movements. This conversation is over. You can take your accusations and your audit report and explain them to a judge. We'll see who the court believes a grieving mother and brother or a gold-digging widow with obvious mental health issues. I look forward to that conversation, I replied calmly. Especially the part where the judge hears about your theft, your lies, and your conspiracy to defraud a child's inheritance. As they filed out of the conference room, Eleanor turned back one final time. You're going to regret this, Samantha. We have resources you can't imagine, connections you don't understand. By the time we're finished with you, no court will let you keep that child. Is that a threat, Eleanor? It's a promise. After they left, I sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, my hands shaking as the adrenaline wore off. The recording device had captured everything: their admissions of theft, their justifications for stealing, their threats against me and Emma. But more than that, it had captured the truth about who they really were. Not grieving family members, concerned about a child's welfare, but desperate criminals trying to cover up their crimes and maintain access to money they'd been stealing. The custody hearing was tomorrow. Eleanor thought she was fighting a young, inexperienced widow who would crumble under pressure. Instead, she'd be facing documented evidence of her own criminal behavior, recorded admissions of guilt, and the full weight of the truth she'd been trying so hard to hide. The confrontation she'd planned to intimidate me had instead provided the final pieces of evidence needed to destroy her completely. The court documents were filed at 8:47 a.m., exactly 1 hour before the custody hearing was scheduled to begin. Janet Morrison had worked through the night to prepare our counter-filing, a comprehensive motion that included the financial audit, the voice recordings, and a detailed timeline of Eleanor and Marcus's criminal conspiracy. The filing wasn't just a defense against their custody petition. It was a nuclear weapon aimed directly at the heart of their case, their credibility, and their freedom. Motion for sanctions and criminal referral, the document began. Respondents Eleanor Blake and Marcus Blake have filed their custody petition in bad faith as part of a continuing criminal conspiracy to defraud the estate of David Blake and his minor daughter Emma Blake. The evidence was presented methodically, building from David's initial suspicions through the forensic audit's findings to the recorded admissions of guilt. Each exhibit was numbered, cross-referenced, and devastating to Eleanor's carefully constructed narrative. Judge Martinez's chambers were packed when we arrived. Eleanor sat with Harold and Marcus, their confidence from the previous day notably absent. They'd clearly been briefed on our filing, and the reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. Your Honor, Janet began when court was called to session. Before we proceed with custody determinations, the court must address fundamental questions about the petitioner's fitness and motivations. The evidence shows that Mrs. Eleanor Blake and Mr. Marcus Blake are criminals who have systematically stolen from the child they now claim to want to protect. Harold tried to object, but Judge Martinez silenced him with a raised hand. I've reviewed the filings, Counselor Brennan. I'm particularly interested in the allegations regarding your own conduct in this matter. The financial audit was entered as evidence first, its clinical language and professional presentation lending weight to every accusation. Rob Kane took the witness stand to explain the methodology, the documentation, and the inescapable conclusions about the scope of the theft. Pattern is unmistakable, Rob testified. Over 18 months, Marcus Blake and Eleanor Blake systematically stole $247,000 from David Blake's business, using their family relationship to mask embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Eleanor's attorney, a young associate from Harold's firm who'd clearly drawn the short straw, tried to challenge the audit's findings. But the documentation was overwhelming. Bank records, casino receipts, fake invoices, forged expense reports, every transaction was traced, verified, and explained. Then came the voice recordings. Janet had prepared a transcript, but she played selected portions of the audio to let Eleanor's own words condemn her. The courtroom fell silent as Eleanor's voice filled the air. We weren't stealing. We were taking what was rightfully ours. David was family, he had obligations to us. Judge Martinez's expression grew increasingly stern as the recordings continued, Marcus admitting to investing stolen money in gambling, Eleanor justifying the theft as payment for raising David, Harold's weak attempts to characterize embezzlement as accounting irregularities. But the most damaging moment came when Eleanor's threat was played. By the time we're finished with you, no court will let you keep that child. Mrs. Blake, Judge Martinez addressed Eleanor directly. Did you make these statements? Eleanor looked to Harold for guidance, but he was studying his hands intently. Your Honor, those recordings were made without my knowledge. That's not what I asked. Did you make these statements? The context was, yes or no, Mrs. Blake. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Yes. And in these recordings, you admit to taking money from your son's business without authorization. It wasn't stealing. David owed us. I'll determine what constitutes theft. Mrs. Blake, right now, I want to understand how someone who admits to taking nearly $250,000 from a child's inheritance believes they should be granted custody of that child. The courtroom was dead silent. Eleanor's carefully crafted image as the concerned grandmother had been destroyed completely, replaced by the reality of a woman whose own words proved her to be a thief and a liar. Harold finally found his voice. Your Honor, these financial matters are separate from the custody question. My client's concern for her granddaughter's welfare is contradicted by her theft from that granddaughter's inheritance. Judge Martinez interrupted. How am I supposed to believe Mrs. Blake wants to protect this child when she's been systematically stealing from her? Janet stood to address the court. Your Honor, this custody petition was never about Emma's welfare. It was about gaining control of her inheritance to cover up theft and provide access to funds the petitioners have no legal right to claim. The evidence continued to mount. The private investigation firm Eleanor had hired to harass me. The coordination with Harold to plan legal strategies before David was even dead. The incorporation of Blake Family Consulting as a vehicle to steal David's business. Marcus was called to testify about his gambling debts, his use of company funds for personal expenses, and his knowledge that David was investigating the theft. His answers were evasive and contradictory, but the documentation spoke for itself. Mr. Blake, Judge Martinez asked, what did you intend to do with the money you were taking from your brother's business? It wasn't taking. David said we were family, that we should benefit from the business's success. Did he specifically authorize you to write checks to cover gambling debts? Marcus's face flushed red. He knew I had some financial difficulties. Did he authorize the checks, yes or no? Not specifically, but so you took money without authorization to cover gambling debts, and you consider this appropriate behavior for someone seeking custody of your brother's child? Marcus had no answer. The hypocrisy was obvious to everyone in the courtroom. A man who'd stolen from his niece's inheritance was claiming he should be trusted with her care. Harold's attempts to salvage the case became increasingly desperate. He tried to argue that the financial irregularities were civil matters unrelated to custody, that Eleanor's love for Emma outweighed any monetary concerns, that a child needed the stability of extended family, but Judge Martinez had heard enough. Counselor Brennan, your clients have admitted under oath to taking substantial sums of money from this child's inheritance without authorization. They threatened the child's mother, hired investigators to harass her, and coordinated a campaign of character assassination. How exactly does this demonstrate their fitness as potential guardians? Your Honor, families sometimes have financial disagreements. This isn't a disagreement, Counselor. This is documented theft. And the timing of this custody petition, immediately after your clients learned they would face criminal charges, suggests their motivation has nothing to do with the child's welfare. The final blow came when Janet presented evidence of Harold's own conflicts of interest. His financial loans to Eleanor, his involvement in incorporating Blake Family Consulting, his coordination of legal strategies before David's death, everything that proved his representation was ethically compromised. Mr. Brennan, Judge Martinez said, her voice ice cold, I'm referring your conduct in this matter to the State Bar for investigation. Your representation of these clients appears to violate multiple ethical rules, and your involvement in their scheme raises questions about your own criminal liability. Harold's face went white. His career, his reputation, his freedom, everything was crumbling around him because he'd chosen greed over ethics. Eleanor made one last desperate attempt to salvage her case. Your Honor, I love my granddaughter. I just want what's best for her. Samantha is young, inexperienced, struggling with grief, Mrs. Blake. Judge Martinez interrupted. You've stolen nearly $250,000 from your granddaughter's inheritance. You've threatened and harassed her mother. You've lied under oath and attempted to perpetrate fraud upon this court. The only struggle I see is your struggle to avoid the consequences of your criminal behavior. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. Eleanor's custody petition was dismissed with prejudice. Marcus was ordered to immediately repay all stolen funds with interest. Both were issued restraining orders prohibiting contact with Emma or me. Harold was suspended from representing either of them pending the bar investigation. But Judge Martinez wasn't finished. I'm also ordering an immediate criminal referral to the state's attorney's office. The evidence presented today suggests multiple felonies have been committed, and this court will not allow criminals to use the family court system to cover up their crimes. As the gavel fell, Eleanor collapsed into sobs, not of grief, but of defeat. The custody petition that was supposed to give her control of Emma's inheritance had instead exposed her as a criminal and destroyed any hope of avoiding prosecution. Marcus sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that his gambling addiction had cost him everything: his relationship with his family, his freedom, and any hope of financial recovery. Harold gathered his papers with shaking hands, knowing that his legal career was over and criminal charges were likely to follow. As we left the courtroom, Janet squeezed my hand. It's over, Samantha. They can't hurt you or Emma anymore. I looked back at Eleanor one last time, remembering the woman who'd whispered "gold digger" at my husband's funeral, who'd tried to steal my daughter, who'd made my life hell for months. Now she was just a broken criminal facing the consequences of her choices. The showdown was over, and justice had finally been served. The settlement agreement was signed on a crisp November morning, exactly 1 year after David's death. Eleanor's trembling signature on the document represented more than legal resolution. It was her formal admission of guilt, her acceptance of consequences, and her acknowledgement that everything she'd accused me of had been projection of her own crimes. Terms were comprehensive and punitive. Eleanor and Marcus are required to pay full restitution of $247,000 plus interest and penalties, bringing the total to $312,000. Eleanor's house was placed in lien to secure payment. Marcus's assets, what few remained after his gambling debts, were seized and liquidated. But the financial restitution was just the beginning. Both Eleanor and Marcus pled guilty to embezzlement and conspiracy charges, accepting felony convictions that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Eleanor received 2 years probation and 500 hours of community service. Marcus, whose gambling addiction was considered an aggravating factor, received 18 months in minimum security prison. Harold Brennan's fall was even more spectacular. The state bar's investigation had uncovered a pattern of ethical violations, spanning years. His law license was revoked permanently, his assets frozen pending criminal prosecution, and his reputation destroyed beyond repair. The criminal charges against him included conspiracy, money laundering, and racketeering, the latter because his coordination of Eleanor and Marcus's scheme qualified as ongoing criminal enterprise. The restraining orders were made permanent. Eleanor and Marcus were prohibited from any contact with Emma or me, directly or through intermediaries. They couldn't attend school events, birthday parties, or any function where Emma might be present. The Blake family's attempt to control our lives had ended with their complete exclusion from them. The civil lawsuit I'd filed for intentional infliction of emotional distress resulted in an additional $150,000 judgment against Eleanor and Marcus. My attorney's fees, Rob Kane's investigation costs, and the forensic audit expenses were all covered by the settlement. Every penny they'd tried to steal had been returned with interest and penalties, but perhaps the most satisfying element of the settlement was the public vindication. The court's findings were entered into public record, documenting Eleanor and Marcus as criminals who'd stolen from their own family while attempting to destroy an innocent widow and her child. Anyone who searched their names would find the truth about their character and crimes. The local media picked up the story, fascinated by the dramatic reversal of fortune. Gold digger accusations backfire as family members face embezzlement charges. Read one headline. Grieving widow vindicated as in-laws admit to stealing $250,000. Read another. The social media pages that had once vilified me were flooded with apologies and expressions of support. The neighbors who'd whispered about my character now crossed the street to avoid the embarrassment of facing me. Mrs. Patterson, who'd brought casseroles after David's death before Eleanor's poison turned her against me, appeared at my door with tears in her eyes and a heartfelt apology. "I'm so sorry, dear," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I should have known better." Eleanor was very convincing, but that's no excuse for doubting you. The vindication extended beyond legal victory. James Morrison offered me full partnership in the consulting business, recognizing that I'd saved the company from being stolen by criminals. David's clients, who'd heard rumors about family disputes, now understood that I was the victim, not the perpetrator. Dr. Williams, my therapist, helped me process the complex emotions that came with total victory. "It's normal to feel conflicted," she explained. "You wanted justice, but seeing people destroyed, even people who hurt you, can be emotionally difficult." She was right. Watching Eleanor break down in court, seeing Marcus led away in handcuffs, witnessing Harold's complete professional destruction, none of it brought me joy. It brought closure, validation, and security for Emma's future, but not happiness. The people who'd made my life hell had revealed themselves to be pathetic, desperate criminals whose own choices had destroyed them. The criminal restitution went into a trust fund for Emma's education, managed by an independent trustee to ensure she'd have every opportunity David had dreamed of providing. The additional civil judgment went towards securing our future, a larger house in a better neighborhood, college savings accounts, and the financial security that would let me focus on being a mother, rather than fighting for survival. Emma's first birthday party was a celebration not just of her life, but of our victory over those who'd tried to destroy us. The guest list included everyone who'd supported us through the darkest times: my mother, Janet Morrison, Rob Kane, James Morrison, Dr. Williams, and the character witnesses who testified to our truth. As Emma played with her birthday presents, blissfully unaware of the legal battles that had secured her future, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since David's death. The war was over. The enemies had been defeated. Justice had been served, but more than that, Emma would grow up knowing the truth. She'd know that her father had been a good man who'd loved her mother genuinely. She'd know that her mother had fought to protect their family's legacy, and she'd know that the people who tried to steal her inheritance and destroy her family had paid the price for their crimes. The settlement agreement was more than a legal document. It was Emma's inheritance of truth, justice, and the security that comes from knowing her family's real story. Eleanor's lies had been replaced by court findings. Marcus's theft had been repaid with interest. Harold's conspiracy had been exposed and punished. As I tucked Emma into her crib that night, read her a story about a princess who fought dragons to protect her kingdom. It seemed appropriate. I'd fought my own dragon's greed, lies, corruption, and cruelty, and I'd won. Emma's kingdom was secure, her inheritance protected, and her future bright. The girl they'd called a gold digger had turned out to be a woman of gold, tested by fire, refined by struggle, and proven pure by truth. Eleanor's accusations had backfired so completely that they'd become a roadmap to her own destruction. Justice had been served, and it was sweet indeed. Emma's first photo album was thick with memories we'd made together, just the two of us, building a new life from the ashes of grief and legal battles. Each picture told the story of our healing: Emma's first smile, her first steps, her first word, which was Mama, much to my delight, and dozens of quiet moments that proved we were more than survivors, we were thrivers. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The months following the settlement were complicated, filled with relief but also exhaustion from the long fight. Dr. Williams helped me understand that victory could be as psychologically challenging as defeat, that learning to live without constant threat required its own adjustment period. "You've been in survival mode for over a year," she explained during one of our sessions. "Your nervous system needs time to understand that the danger is over, that you can finally relax and focus on building rather than defending." Slowly, carefully, I began to rebuild not just our financial security, but our emotional foundation. The house we'd shared with David held too many memories, both beautiful and painful, so I made the decision to sell it and start fresh. New house was smaller but brighter, with a large backyard where Emma could play and gardens where I could find peace. The consulting business that David had built became our security and my purpose. Working with James Morrison, I discovered that I had a natural talent for the strategic thinking and problem-solving that had helped me defeat Eleanor's conspiracy. What had started as desperate self-defense evolved into genuine business acumen. "You should consider going back to school," James suggested one afternoon as we reviewed quarterly reports. "Finish that law degree you started. You've got more practical legal experience than most attorneys twice your age." The idea was appealing but daunting. Law school with a toddler seemed impossible, but Janet Morrison had a solution. "Part-time evening program," she explained. "It'll take longer, but you can maintain your work schedule and still be there for Emma. Plus, I could use a partner who understands both business and family law." Returning to Northwestern felt like coming full circle. Walking across the campus, where David and I had met, sitting in lecture halls where we'd fallen in love with ideas and each other, was bittersweet but healing. I was no longer the young woman who dreamed of changing the world through law. I was a mother who'd used legal principles to protect her child, and now wanted to help others do the same. My classmates were mostly younger, fresh from undergraduate programs and full of theoretical knowledge. I brought something different: real-world experience with how the legal system actually worked, how truth could be weaponized by lies, how documentation and evidence could overcome even the most sophisticated deception. Emma thrived in the structured life we'd built. The daycare center near the law school became her second home, staffed by caring professionals who helped her develop social skills and confidence. She was a bright, happy child who showed no signs of the trauma that had surrounded her early months. On weekends, we developed our own traditions. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, where Emma learned to pick the ripest fruit and charm vendors with her smile. Sunday afternoons in Lincoln Park, where she fed ducks and played on swings while I studied in the sunshine. These were the memories I wanted to have, not courtroom battles and family betrayal, but simple joy and security. My mother visited monthly, marveling at Emma's development and my transformation. "You're not the same person who called me crying from the hospital," she observed during one visit. "You found your strength." She was right. The woman who'd sat terrified in Harold Brennan's office, overwhelmed by legal papers and family hostility, had been replaced by someone confident in her abilities and secure in her rights. The trials had burned away self-doubt and revealed capabilities I'd never known I possessed. The business continued to grow under my partnership with James. Word had spread about our successful defense against a sophisticated embezzlement scheme, and other small business owners sought our expertise in protecting themselves from similar threats. We developed a specialty in family business consulting, helping entrepreneurs create structures that protected against both external threats and internal betrayal. Each case reminded me of David's story: hard-working people building something meaningful, vulnerable to those they trusted most. I threw myself into this work with passion, knowing that every business we protected was a family we'd saved from the devastation we'd experienced. Emma's second birthday party was held in our new backyard, filled with friends from daycare and neighbors who'd become genuine supporters. As I watched her blow out candles and open presents, I felt David's presence strongly, not as grief or loss, but as continuing love and approval. That evening, after Emma was asleep, I sat in my study reviewing case files and reading for the next day's classes. The room was quiet, except for the soft sound of Emma's breathing through the baby monitor. This was our life now: busy, purposeful, secure, and genuinely happy. The photo album sat on my desk, open to a picture of Emma taking her first steps in our new garden. She was reaching toward the camera with complete trust, knowing someone would be there to catch her if she fell. That trust was what I'd been fighting for all along, not just her financial inheritance, but her emotional security. Her right to grow up knowing she was loved and protected. The healing was complete not because the pain was gone, but because it had been transformed into strength. David's death would always be a loss, but it was no longer a tragedy that defined us. Instead, it had become the catalyst for discovering capabilities I'd never known I possessed, and building a life I'd never imagined possible. Emma stirred in her sleep, making the soft sounds that meant she was dreaming. I wondered what she dreamed about. Probably ducks and playground swings, birthday cake and bedtime stories. Normal, happy toddler dreams, unmarked by the battles that had secured her right to have them. The transformation was complete. We were no longer victims of other people's greed and cruelty. We were the authors of our own story, the architects of our own future, and the guardians of our own happiness. The memorial garden stone was simple granite, engraved with David's name, dates, and a single line that captured who he truly was: the beloved husband and father who chose love over loyalty. I'd had it installed in the corner of our new garden where Emma liked to play, creating a space where she could connect with her father's memory as she grew. 2 years had passed since that terrible night, when the police called about David's accident. 2 years since Eleanor had whispered "gold digger" at his funeral. 2 years since the legal battles began that would ultimately expose the truth about everyone involved. Emma was now a confident 3-year-old who chattered constantly, asked endless questions, and showed David same curiosity about the world around her. She knew her daddy had loved her very much, that he'd gone to heaven before she was born, and that Mommy had pictures and stories to share whenever she wanted to know more. "Tell me about Daddy's work," she'd request, settling into my lap with the patience of a child who knew this was important. I'd tell her how David had helped other people solve problems, how he'd built a business to take care of his family, how he'd been excited about teaching her to ride a bike and helping with homework. The ugly parts, the theft, the harassment, the legal battles would come later, when she was old enough to understand nuance and complexity. For now, she needed only the truth that mattered. She was loved. She was wanted. And her father had been a good man who protected her even after his death. My law degree was nearly complete. With just one semester remaining, Janet Morrison had made good on her offer of partnership, and Morrison and Blake family law was already developing a reputation for fierce advocacy and creative solutions to complex family disputes. Our specialty in business family law had grown from my own experience into expertise that helped other families avoid the betrayals we'd endured. The Blake family consulting business had flourished under James's leadership and my growing involvement. What David had built as a modest firm serving small businesses had evolved into a respected consultancy with corporate clients and steady growth. Emma's inheritance was secure not just from the restitution we'd recovered, but from the continuing success of her father's vision. Eleanor's consequences had continued to compound over the 2 years. The felony conviction had made employment nearly impossible, forcing her to survive on Social Security and food assistance. Her house had been sold to pay restitution, leaving her in a small apartment with few possessions and fewer friends. The social circle that had once admired her as a grieving mother now shunned her as a convicted criminal. Marcus had served his 18 months in prison and emerged broken by the experience. The gambling addiction that had started his downfall had been replaced by depression and social isolation. He'd lost his family, his freedom, his reputation, and any hope of financial recovery. The last I'd heard, he was working at a convenience store and living with a cousin who'd reluctantly agreed to help. Harold Brennan's destruction had been total. The criminal conviction for conspiracy and money laundering had resulted in 5 years in federal prison. His law practice had been dissolved, his assets seized, and his family destroyed by the scandal. The man who'd helped orchestrate my destruction had lost everything while I'd rebuilt my life stronger than before. That perhaps the most significant development was one I hadn't expected. Romance had found me again. Dr. Michael Chin, a pediatrician at Emma's practice, had been patient and persistent in his quiet courtship. He'd started with professional conversations about Emma's development, progressed to coffee meetings to discuss her care, and eventually admitted he was interested in getting to know both of us better. Michael was everything David hadn't been: older, established, cautious where David had been impulsive. But he shared David's fundamental decency, his commitment to family, and his respect for the strength I'd shown in protecting Emma. Their relationship developed slowly, with Michael understanding that Emma's approval was more important than mine, and not trying to replace her father. He told me during one of our early dinners, "No one could do that. But I'd like to be part of her future, if you'll let me." Emma adored him, especially his willingness to read the same bedtime story 7 times in a row and his talent for making funny voices during playtime. When she'd started calling him Dr. Mike and insisting he join us for weekend park visits, I'd known that our family was ready to grow again. The proposal had come in the memorial garden, with Emma's help and approval. Michael had asked her permission first, then knelt beside David's stone to ask for mine. It felt appropriate, somehow honoring David's memory while embracing the possibility of new love. "David wanted you to be happy," Michael had said, his voice gentle but confident. "Emma deserves to grow up in a home full of love. Will you let me help you build that?" The engagement ring was different from David's grandmother's solitaire. A sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the light like Emma's eyes when she laughed. New love for a new chapter, honoring the past while embracing the future. As I sat in the garden that evening, watching Emma chase fireflies while Michael helped her catch them in a jar, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The woman who'd buried her husband while pregnant, who'd endured months of harassment and legal battles, who'd been called a gold digger by people who were stealing from her child. That woman had discovered strength she'd never known she possessed. Eleanor's accusations had been projection, pure and simple. She'd been the gold digger, manipulating family relationships for financial gain. She'd been the one trapped by circumstances, desperate enough to steal from her own granddaughter. She'd been the one destroying a family, just not in the way she'd claimed. The truth had not just set us free, It had revealed who we really were. David had been a loving husband and father who protected his family even in death. I'd been a woman of integrity who'd fought for justice and won. Emma was a cherished daughter whose inheritance of love mattered more than money. As the evening light faded and Michael helped Emma release her fireflies back into the garden, I felt David's presence one final time, not as loss or grief, but as blessing and approval. The life we were building honored his memory while embracing new possibilities. The memorial stone caught the last rays of sunlight, its simple message reflecting the truth that had sustained us through every trial. Beloved husband and father, who chose love over loyalty. In the end, that choice had made all the difference. Emma ran to me with dirt-stained hands and a glowing smile, chattering about fireflies and plans for tomorrow. Michael followed, his expression soft with contentment as he watched the child who'd become as important to him as she was to me. This was our new beginning, built on truth, strengthened by struggle, and blessed with the kind of love that Eleanor had tried to destroy but had only made stronger. The gold digger accusations had backfired completely, revealing the accusers as the true criminals while vindicating the woman they tried to destroy. Justice had been served, healing had been completed, and new love had been found. The story that began with grief and betrayal had ended with hope and happiness. Emma's laughter echoed through the garden as she planned tomorrow's adventures, secure in the knowledge that she was loved, protected, and free to write her own story. And that, more than any inheritance or legal victory, was the true measure of our triumph.